Have you ever wondered how one act of kindness could completely transform two broken lives? The December rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse like thousands of tiny fists demanding entry. Alexander Bennett stood motionless, a glass of bourbon forgotten in his hand, watching the Seattle skyline disappear behind sheets of water. The Space Needle's lights blurred into watercolor streaks, and somewhere far below, the city rushed home through the storm. 3 years. It had been 3 years since he'd felt anything but this hollow numbness. 3 years since the accident that took Vanessa and their unborn daughter. 3 years of existing in this pristine, silent tomb of glass and steel. His phone buzzed. Work. Always work. Alexander ignored it. The marketing reports could wait. Everything could wait. Time had lost its urgency when you had nothing to look forward to. That's when he saw her. At first, she was just a dark figure stumbling along the rain-soaked street 12 floors below, barely visible through the downpour. But something made Alexander set down his glass and move closer to the window. The figure fell, got up, fell again. And this time Alexander saw what she was clutching to her chest, a small bundle, wrapped tightly against the rain. A child. His heart, dormant for so long, suddenly kicked against his ribs like a prisoner demanding release. Alexander was moving before he could think, grabbing his coat, his keys, bypassing the elevator for the stairs, because it would be faster. His building manager, Gerald, looked up startled from the security desk. "Mr. Bennett, is everything all right?" "Call an ambulance," Alexander said, already pushing through the revolving doors into the brutal cold of the storm. "Woman and child, possibly injured, corner of 4th and Pine." The rain soaked through his $1,500 suit in seconds. Alexander didn't care. He ran toward where he'd seen her fall, his expensive Italian shoes slipping on the wet pavement. And there she was, huddled against a shuttered storefront, trying to shield the baby with her body while the wind tore at them both. "Miss!" Alexander called out, approaching slowly so as not to frighten her. "Miss, are you hurt?" She looked up, and even through the rain and darkness, he could see the fear in her eyes. She was young, maybe early 30s, with dark hair plastered to her face, and the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. The baby in her arms couldn't have been more than a year old, was crying, that high-pitched wail of a cold, frightened child. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please, I need to find shelter, just until the rain stops." "Can you walk?" Alexander knelt beside her, noticing how she instinctively pulled the baby closer, protective even in her desperation. "I think so. I twisted my ankle when I fell." She tried to stand and winced. Alexander didn't hesitate. "I live right there," he pointed to the tower looming above them. "Let me help you, both of you, please." I can't. Her protest died as the baby's cries intensified, and Alexander saw the exact moment she made the choice, her child's safety over her own fear of strangers. "Okay," she whispered. Alexander helped her up, supporting most of her weight as they made their slow, painful way to his building. Gerald rushed to meet them with towels and umbrellas, though at this point they were useless. "Ambulance is 5 minutes out, Mr. Bennett," Gerald said, his professional demeanor cracking with concern. "Should I prepare the guest suite?" "Yes, thank you, Gerald, and call Dr. Morrison. Tell her it's urgent." In the elevator, Alexander got his first real look at the woman and child he'd rescued. The woman's clothes were worn but clean, her hands roughened by work. The baby, a girl with enormous dark eyes and curly hair, had stopped crying and was now just shivering violently against her mother's chest. "What's her name?" Alexander asked gently. "Emma," the woman said. "She's 13 months old, and I'm Sophie Mitchell." "Alexander Bennett, we're almost there. I have dry clothes, food, whatever you need." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you helping us? You don't know us. We could be—" "You could be a mother and child who need help," Alexander interrupted firmly. "That's all I need to know." The penthouse elevator opened directly into his home. Sophie gasped, despite herself. The space was enormous, all glass and steel and expensive art, the kind of luxury most people only saw in magazines. But Alexander barely noticed her reaction. He was already calling out to his housekeeper. "Helen, Helen, I need your help. A woman in her 60s appeared from the kitchen, her eyes widening as she took in the dripping, bedraggled pair. But Helen had worked for Alexander's family for 30 years, and she'd seen everything. Without missing a beat, she hurried forward. "Oh, you poor things, come, let's get you out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia." Helen gently reached for Emma, and after a moment's hesitation, Sophie let her take the baby. "What a beautiful little girl. Look at those eyes. Come with me, sweetheart. We'll get you warm and dry." "The guest bathroom has everything," Alexander told Sophie. "Helen will bring you clothes. They might be too big, but they're dry. Dr. Morrison is on her way." "I can't afford a doctor," Sophie said quickly, panic flashing across her face. "You don't need to afford anything. Please, just let us help." Sophie opened her mouth to argue, but Emma started crying again, and the sound seemed to break something in her. She nodded mutely and followed Helen down the hall. Alexander stood alone in his living room, dripping onto the marble floor, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't for 3 years. What was he doing? He didn't know these people. They could be anyone. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was that small bundle in Sophie's arms, and all he could feel was the ghost of the daughter he'd never gotten to hold. 20 minutes later, Dr. Sarah Morrison arrived, her medical bag in hand and questions in her eyes. She was Alexander's personal physician and an old family friend who'd helped him through the darkest days after Vanessa's death. "Alexander," she greeted him, taking in his still damp hair and haunted expression. "Gerald said it was an emergency?" "A woman and her baby. I found them in the storm. The woman might have a sprained ankle, and the baby." He hesitated. "Just please make sure they're okay." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "All right, where are they?" Helen appeared, carrying Emma, who was now wrapped in a fluffy white towel and had stopped crying. The baby looked around with wide, curious eyes, and when she saw Alexander, she smiled. Just smiled, as if she knew him, as if she trusted him completely. Something cracked in Alexander's chest. Sophie emerged from the guest room wearing Helen's spare clothes, sweatpants, and an oversized sweater that made her look even smaller and more vulnerable. Her hair was towel-dried and falling in dark waves around her face, and without the rain and fear obscuring her features, Alexander could see that she was beautiful in a quiet, understated way. Dr. Morrison examined them both with her usual efficiency. Emma was fine, just cold and hungry. Sophie's ankle was sprained but not broken, and she had several bruises from her falls. Nothing serious, but Sarah prescribed rest and made Sophie promise to stay off her feet for at least 24 hours. "I'll be back tomorrow to check on you," Sarah said, packing up her bag. She turned to Alexander, lowering her voice. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" They stepped into Alexander's office, a room of dark wood and leather that still smelled faintly of his father's cigars from decades past. "What are you doing, Alex?" Sarah asked bluntly. They'd known each other too long for pretense. "I'm helping someone who needs it." "Is that all this is?" Alexander was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "I saw them out there, and I couldn't walk away. I couldn't." Sarah's expression softened. "It's been 3 years. Maybe it's time." "Time for what?" "To start living again. To let yourself feel something." She squeezed his shoulder. "Just be careful, okay? For your sake and theirs." After Sarah left, Alexander returned to find Sophie sitting on the edge of the couch, Emma asleep in her arms. Helen was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared food, and for the first time in 3 years, Alexander's home didn't feel like a mausoleum. "How are you feeling?" he asked Sophie. "Better, thank you. Your doctor is very kind." Sophie adjusted Emma gently. "And this place, it's incredible. It's just a home." Sophie looked around at the art, the view, the obvious wealth. "It's more than that. It's like something from a movie." She paused. "Mr. Bennett. Alexander, please." "Alexander," she corrected softly. "I need to be honest with you. I can't pay you back for any of this. Not the doctor, not the help, nothing. I don't have money right now." "I don't want your money." "Then why are you doing this? People don't just help strangers for no reason." Alexander sat down across from her, choosing his words carefully. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and our baby daughter in a car accident. She was 6 months pregnant. He saw Sophie's face crumple with sympathy. Since then, I've been stuck, just going through the motions. And tonight, when I saw you out there with your daughter, something in me just woke up. So maybe I'm not doing this entirely for you. Maybe I'm doing it for me too. Sophie was quiet for a long time, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry for whatever brought you out into that storm with a baby. You don't have to tell me, but if you want to, I'll listen. Sophie looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully now. My ex-husband, she said finally. Michael, we divorced 8 months ago, or I thought we did. Turns out he never filed the papers. And now he's... She took a shaky breath. He's been following me, calling constantly, showing up at my work until I got fired because my boss didn't want the drama. Showing up at my apartment until my landlord evicted me for the disturbances. That's stalking, Alexander said, his voice hard. You need to file a restraining order. I tried. I don't have enough proof. The police said, unless he threatens me directly or physically harms me. She shrugged helplessly. I've been staying at a women's shelter for the past week, but they can only keep you for 30 days. Tonight I was trying to get to my friend Lisa's house across town. But I missed the last bus, and the rain started, and Emma was crying. And I just, Her voice broke. I didn't know what else to do. Emma stirred in her sleep, making a soft sound. Sophie immediately started rocking gently, her entire focus shifting to her daughter. It was instinctive, automatic, and it reminded Alexander so sharply of how Vanessa would have been with their daughter that he had to look away. Stay here, he heard himself say. Sophie's head snapped up. What? Stay here, for as long as you need. I have 4 bedrooms that no one uses. Helen is here during the day. Gerald monitors building security 24/7. Your ex-husband couldn't get within 100 feet without us knowing. I can't accept that. Why not? Because I don't know you, because it's too much, because you're afraid. Alexander interrupted gently. I understand, but you're more afraid of what's waiting for you out there, aren't you? Sophie's silence was answer enough. Look, Alexander continued, stay tonight. Tomorrow, when it's light and the storm has passed, you can make whatever decision you want. But for tonight, please just let yourself and Emma rest somewhere safe. Helen appeared with a tray of food, soup, fresh bread, tea. I hope you're hungry, dear. And I found some formula in the emergency supplies. Is that all right for the little one? Sophie nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She drank the soup gratefully while Helen bottle-fed Emma, and Alexander watched them, these strangers who'd crashed into his life like a storm themselves. That night, after Sophie and Emma were settled in the largest guest room, Alexander stood at his window again, looking out at the city. The rain had finally stopped, leaving everything washed clean and glistening. His phone buzzed with the messages he'd been ignoring all evening. Work. Always work. He silenced it completely. For the first time in 3 years, Alexander Bennett fell asleep thinking about tomorrow instead of yesterday. And down the hall, Sophie Mitchell lay awake, listening to her daughter breathe, wondering if she'd just made the best or worst decision of her life by trusting a stranger. Neither of them knew that this was just the beginning. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the Seattle skyline into something magical. Sophie woke slowly, disoriented by the soft sheets and the unfamiliar ceiling. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, and panic seized her. Then Emma cooed softly from the porta-crib Helen had somehow procured during the night, and everything came flooding back. The storm, the fall, Alexander Bennett. Sophie sat up carefully, testing her ankle. It was sore and swollen, but manageable. She picked up Emma, who immediately grabbed a fistful of her hair, giggling. Good morning, baby girl, Sophie whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. What do we do now? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Sophie, it's Helen. May I come in? Of course. Helen entered, carrying a tray laden with breakfast, eggs, toast, fresh fruit, juice and coffee. "I thought you might be hungry. How's the ankle?" "Better, thank you. Helen, this is too much." "Nonsense. You're recovering. You need to eat." Helen set the tray on the small table by the window. "Mr. Bennett had to go into the office for a few hours, but he asked me to make sure you have everything you need, and he wanted me to give you this." She handed Sophie a phone, a brand new smartphone still in its box. "I can't accept this," Sophie said immediately. "He knew you'd say that, so he asked me to tell you that it's not a gift, it's a safety measure. He wants you to be able to call for help if you need it. His number is already programmed in, along with mine, Gerald's, and Dr. Morrison's, and emergency services, of course." Sophie stared at the phone, emotions warring in her chest. "Why is he doing this?" Helen sat down across from her, her expression kind but serious. "I've worked for the Bennett family for 30 years. I watched Alexander grow up, get married, build his business, and I watched him nearly destroy himself after the accident." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Last night was the first time in 3 years I've seen him look truly alive. Whatever you think about accepting his help, please know that you're helping him too." Before Sophie could respond, the main door opened. Alexander's voice called out, "Helen, is Sophie awake?" "In here, Mr. Bennett." Alexander appeared in the doorway, and Sophie's breath caught. In daylight, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit with his dark hair slightly tousled, he was even more imposing than she'd remembered. But it was his eyes that held her, grey like the morning sky, and filled with an uncertainty that somehow made him more human. "Good morning," he said. "How are you both?" "Better. Thank you for everything, really." Sophie gestured to the breakfast, the phone. "But I need to figure out my next steps. I can't stay here." "Why not?" "And because I'm a stranger, because you barely know me, because you're independent and you don't like accepting help," Alexander finished. "I understand, but can I make a suggestion?" Sophie nodded warily. "Let me help you find a job and a place to live. I have connections all over the city. I can make some calls, set up interviews. In the meantime, you stay here where you're safe. Think of it as temporary housing assistance. I don't need charity. It's not charity, it's—" Alexander ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with what to say. "Look, I'm going to be honest. This penthouse has been a prison for me for 3 years. I've been going through the motions of living without actually living. And last night, for the first time since Vanessa died, I felt something, purpose maybe, or just connection. I'm not trying to save you, I'm trying to save myself." The raw honesty in his voice stopped Sophie's objections. "1 week," she heard herself say. "I'll stay for 1 week while I look for work. But I pay you back, every penny, even if it takes years." "Deal." Alexander smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Now, eat your breakfast. Helen's cooking is not to be refused." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Alexander would leave early for his company, Bennett Technologies, a major player in software development. Helen would help Sophie with Emma, while Sophie made calls and sent out resumes. Evenings, Alexander would return and they'd share dinner. The 3 adults and 1 baby, creating an unlikely family unit. Sophie learned that Alexander was 35, had built his company from the ground up after college, and was known as a brilliant but reclusive CEO. He learned that Sophie was 32, had been an elementary school teacher before Emma was born, and had dreams of opening her own preschool someday. "Why did you stop teaching?" Alexander asked one evening. They were sitting in the living room, Emma playing on a blanket between them. "Michael didn't want me to work after Emma was born. He said a mother should stay home, which was fine. I wanted to be with her. But then when I tried to go back after the divorce..." Sophie's voice hardened. "He called every school I applied to, told them I was unstable, unreliable. They all withdrew their offers." "That's defamation. You could sue him. With what money, with what energy? I just wanted to get away and start over." Emma chose that moment to toddle unsteadily toward Alexander, who'd been sitting on the floor. She grabbed his knee to steady herself, looked up at him with her enormous eyes, and said quite clearly, "Dada." The room went silent. "I'm sorry," Sophie said quickly, reaching for Emma. "She's at that age where she calls every man that. She doesn't understand." "It's okay." Alexander's voice was rough. He held Emma's tiny hand, staring at her with an expression Sophie couldn't quite read. "It's okay." But that night, alone in his bedroom, Alexander sat on the edge of his bed with a photo of Vanessa in his hands, and he cried. Not the numb, empty tears of the past 3 years, but real, cleansing sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. He cried for what he'd lost. And then, terrifyingly, he cried because he realized he was starting to feel again, starting to hope again, and he didn't know if he could survive losing someone again. The next morning, Sophie received a call from Lisa, her friend across town. "Sophie! Oh my God, where are you? I've been calling your old number." "I'm safe. I'm staying with a friend." Sophie glanced at Alexander, who was reading the paper at the breakfast table, pretending not to listen. "How are you?" "How am I? How are you? Sophie, Michael has been calling me non-stop. He's looking for you. He sounds unhinged." Sophie's blood ran cold. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I don't know where you are, but Sophie, you need to be careful. He's saying crazy things about taking Emma, about proving you're an unfit mother." After the call ended, Sophie sat frozen, staring at nothing. Emma was playing with blocks in the corner, blissfully unaware of the threat hanging over them. "Sophie?" Alexander's voice pulled her back. "What happened?" she told him, her voice shaking. Alexander listened, his expression growing darker with each word. "That's it," he said finally. "We're calling a lawyer, a good one, and we're filing for a restraining order with actual teeth this time." "Alexander, I told you I can't afford—" "Then I'll pay for it." "No, I can't let you—" "Sophie." Alexander knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. "Let me help, please, not because you're weak or incapable, but because no one should have to face this alone, and because—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "Because I care about what happens to you. To both of you." Sophie looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. This man, this near stranger cared, really cared, and it terrified her almost as much as Michael did. "Okay," she whispered, "okay." Alexander called his attorney, Marcus Chen, one of the best family lawyers in Seattle. Within an hour, they had an appointment for the next day. That evening, Alexander came home early with a box from a toy store. "What's this?" Sophie asked. "Emma's birthday is next month, right? Helen mentioned it. I thought—" He pulled out a plush teddy bear, soft and perfect. "I thought she might like this!" Emma squealed with delight, immediately hugging the bear to her chest. "Bear! Bear!" Sophie felt tears sting her eyes. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to!" Alexander watched Emma with that expression again. The one Sophie was learning meant he was thinking about the daughter he'd never met. Every child should have a teddy bear. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sophie and Alexander sat on the balcony overlooking the city. It was cold but clear, and the lights of Seattle spread before them like a blanket of stars. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said quietly. "Of course." "What was her name, your daughter?" Alexander was silent for so long that Sophie thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Lily. We were going to name her Lily Rose Bennett." "That's beautiful." "She would have been 3 this month." Alexander's voice broke slightly. 3 years old, in preschool, learning to write her name, maybe dancing or playing soccer or doing whatever 3-year-olds do. Sophie reached over and took his hand. "She would have been lucky to have you as a father. I'll never know." "No, but you know what? I think Lily sent Emma to you. I think she sent me to you, because we all needed each other." Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, and Sophie felt something shift between them, something dangerous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I think you might be right," he said softly. They sat there until the early hours, hands clasped, watching the city below, neither willing to break the moment by going inside. And somewhere in that cold December night, 2 broken people began to heal. The meeting with Marcus Chen was intense. He listened to Sophie's story, took notes, and asked pointed questions about Michael's behavior. Then he leaned back in his leather chair and delivered his assessment. You have a case for a restraining order, but it's not guaranteed. The problem is documentation. Most of the harassment has been verbal. The calls can be shown, but without recordings of threats, it's your word against his. So what do I do? Sophie asked, feeling hope drain away. We build a case. I'll file for the restraining order, but simultaneously we file for custody modification. Right now, you have joint custody, correct? Yes, but he never exercises his visitation. Good. We document that. We document the harassment, the job interference, everything. It'll take time, but we'll build an airtight case. Marcus looked at Alexander. In the meantime, your security arrangement is solid. Keep her there. Keep everything documented, and don't engage with him at all. Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged. Sophie enrolled Emma in a small daycare that Helen recommended, allowing her to job hunt more seriously. She went to interviews, slowly rebuilding her professional identity, and every evening she came home to the penthouse, to Helen's warm meals and Alexander's quiet presence. They grew closer, slowly, carefully. Alexander taught Emma to play with building blocks. Sophie convinced him to decorate the penthouse for Christmas, something he hadn't done since Vanessa's death. They watched movies together, talked late into the night, shared the mundane details of their days. And one evening, 3 weeks after that first stormy night, Alexander came home to find Sophie cooking in his kitchen, Emma in a playpen nearby, singing off-key to herself. The scene was so domestic, so perfectly normal, that it hit him like a physical blow. "You're home early," Sophie said, smiling at him. She had flour on her cheek. Yes." Alexander set down his briefcase, unable to take his eyes off her. "Sophie, I need to tell you something." She turned off the stove, something in his tone making her alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's—" He ran a hand through his hair. A gesture Sophie had learned meant he was nervous. "I'm falling for you. I'm falling for both of you, and I know it's too soon. I know you're still dealing with the divorce and Michael and everything else. I know I'm probably the last thing you need right now. But I can't keep pretending this is just charity or friendship or whatever we've been calling it." Sophie stood frozen, her heart pounding. "Alexander, you don't have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I just needed you to know. I needed to be honest. And if it makes you uncomfortable, if you want to leave, I understand. I'll help you find a place. I'll still pay for the lawyer. Nothing changes except—" "Shut up!" Sophie interrupted. And then she kissed him. It was soft and tentative and perfect. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Sophie rested her forehead against his. "I'm falling for you too," she whispered. "And it terrifies me, because what if I'm making the same mistake again? What if I'm just running from one man to another? What if—" Now it was Alexander's turn to interrupt. What if it's not a mistake? What if it's just two people who found each other at exactly the right time? Emma chose that moment to bang her blocks together and shout, "Kiss! Kiss!" They both laughed, the tension breaking. "I think we've been caught," Sophie said. "I think we have." From that night forward, they were together, not just housemates, but partners. They still moved slowly, carefully, aware of the fragility of what they were building. But every day, the foundation grew stronger. And then Michael found them. It was a Tuesday morning in mid-December. Sophie was walking back from dropping Emma at daycare when she saw him. He was standing across the street from Alexander's building, just watching. Their eyes met, and Michael smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Sophie's blood turned to ice. She walked faster, nearly running into the building. Gerald saw her face and immediately went on alert. "What happened?" "My ex-husband. He's outside. He's found me." Gerald immediately called Alexander while activating enhanced building security. Within 20 minutes, Alexander was home, and Marcus Chen was on speakerphone. "Did he approach you?" Marcus asked. "No, he just watched me." "That's not technically illegal, but combined with everything else, it strengthens our case. I'm filing an emergency restraining order today. In the meantime, Alexander, I need you to review your security protocols." Alexander was pacing, his usual calm shattered. "I want cameras on every entrance. I want Gerald to have additional staff. I want—" Alex, Sophie interrupted gently. I can leave. I can go somewhere else. I won't put you in danger. Absolutely not. Alexander's voice was fierce. You're not leaving. He doesn't get to drive you away from somewhere you're safe. We'll handle this together. But Michael wasn't done. Over the next few days, he escalated. He sent flowers to the building with notes that read, I miss my family. He showed up at Emma's daycare trying to sign her out. He hired a private investigator to follow Sophie. The emergency restraining order was granted, but Michael violated it almost immediately, standing on the public sidewalk across from the building, technically legal, but clearly threatening. He's playing games, Marcus said during an emergency conference call. He knows exactly how far he can push without getting arrested. But he's making mistakes. He contacted Emma's daycare without authorization. He hired a PI to follow Sophie, which constitutes stalking. We have him. How long? Alexander demanded. How long until she's safe? The full custody hearing is in 3 weeks. If you can hold out until then, I promise you we'll bury him. Those 3 weeks were the longest of Sophie's life. She couldn't leave the building without Alexander or security. Emma had to be escorted to daycare by trained personnel. The whole situation felt surreal, like being in prison despite being in a penthouse. But Alexander never wavered. He rearranged his entire schedule to work from home. He hired a child psychologist to make sure Emma wasn't traumatized. He held Sophie when she cried and listened when she raged and gave her space when she needed it. And slowly, Sophie realized something. She loved him. Not because he was rich or because he was protecting her, but because of who he was. Kind and patient and broken in all the ways she was broken, fitting together like puzzle pieces that had been waiting to find each other. I love you, she told him one night. They were in his bedroom, Emma asleep in the room next door, soft light from the city filtering through the windows. Alexander pulled back to look at her. Are you sure? Because you're under a lot of stress and sometimes... I'm sure. Sophie cupped his face in her hands. I love you, Alexander Bennett. Not because you saved me, but because of who you are. Because you make me laugh. Because you read bedtime stories to my daughter with all the funny voices. Because you see me, really see me, in a way no one else ever has. Alexander kissed her, deep and urgent and full of promise. I love you too, both of you. I want this, all of it. The late-night feedings and the tantrums and the mess. I want a family again, with you. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Not yet. Not while you're still legally tied to him, but soon. When you're free. When we can start fresh. He smiled. I want to do this right. The custody hearing finally arrived. Sophie sat in the courtroom with Alexander beside her, Marcus in front of them, and a pile of evidence that would make Michael's life very difficult. Michael's lawyer tried to paint Sophie as unstable, moving in with a man she'd just met, unable to hold down a job. But Marcus had prepared for everything. He presented Sophie's teaching credentials, recommendations from former principals, the documented harassment from Michael that had resulted in her job losses. He presented the daycare incident, the stalking reports, the violated restraining order. He had Emma's daycare providers testify that she was a thriving, happy child, clearly well cared for. And then Marcus played his ace. A recording. Where did you get this? Michael's lawyer demanded. From a concerned employee at Mr. Mitchell's office who witnessed this phone call last week and felt compelled to record it for this child's safety. The recording was damning. Michael, drunk and angry, telling a colleague exactly how he planned to get his wife and kid back, including threats to make Sophie's life a living hell until she had no choice but to return. The judge listened to the entire recording, his expression growing darker by the minute. When it finished, he removed his glasses and looked directly at Michael. Mr. Mitchell, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a clear case of domestic manipulation and harassment. I'm granting Ms. Mitchell full physical and legal custody of Emma Rose Mitchell. You will be allowed supervised visitation once per month, pending successful completion of anger management courses and a psychological evaluation. The restraining order is extended to 500 feet and includes all digital communication. If you violate it again, you will face criminal charges. Are we clear? Michael's face went purple with rage, but his lawyer quickly pulled him back before he could speak. "We're clear, Your Honor," the lawyer said tightly. Outside the courtroom, Sophie collapsed against Alexander, sobbing with relief. "It's over. It's really over." "It's over," Alexander confirmed, holding her tightly. "You're free. She's safe. We're all safe." Marcus shook their hands. "Congratulations. Now go home and celebrate." They did celebrate that night, with Helen and Gerald and Dr. Morrison all gathered at the penthouse. Emma was passed from person to person, giggling at all the attention. And Sophie watched Alexander with her daughter, saw the love and care in every gesture, and knew she'd found her home. That night, after everyone had left and Emma was asleep, Alexander led Sophie out to the balcony. The December air was cold and crisp, the city spread out before them like a promise. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Sophie's breath caught. "Alexander, I know we said we'd wait, but Sophie, I don't want to wait anymore. I've wasted 3 years of my life being afraid to feel, afraid to live. I don't want to waste another minute." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. "I'm not trying to save you. You've already saved yourself. I'm asking you to build a life with me. To let me be Emma's father, not by blood, but by choice. To take this broken man and help him become whole again." "Yes," Sophie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, to all of it." Alexander slipped the ring on her finger, and they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who'd found each other in a storm and decided to build their own shelter together. The wedding was small, held in early March in the penthouse with only their closest friends and family. Emma was the flower girl, taking her job very seriously as she scattered rose petals down the makeshift aisle. Helen cried through the entire ceremony. Gerald gave Sophie away, having become like a father to her. And Dr. Morrison officiated, because as she said, "I brought this family back to life. I should get to make it official." But the best moment came later, after the ceremony, when Emma toddled up to Alexander, tugged on his pant leg, and said quite clearly, "Daddy, up!" Alexander picked her up, and Emma wrapped her chubby arms around his neck. "My daddy," she announced to the room. "That's right, sweetheart," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your daddy, forever." Sophie stood beside them, looking at her husband and daughter, and marveled at how life could change. 6 months ago, she'd been desperate and alone in a storm. Now she had a family, a home, a future full of possibilities. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked, noticing her expression. "I'm thinking about that night. When I was standing in the rain, terrified, with nowhere to go, and how you opened your door to a complete stranger. Best decision I ever made. Mine too." Sophie kissed him softly. "Thank you for finding us. Thank you for letting me." Emma squirmed to be put down, immediately running toward Helen, who was cutting cake. They laughed and followed her, these 3 people who'd become a family not through blood or circumstance, but through choice and love and the simple act of opening a door during a storm. 6 months after the wedding, Sophie stood in the doorway of a small but perfect space in a renovated building downtown. The lease was signed, the permits were approved, and in 4 weeks, Little Lily's Learning Center would open its doors to its first class of preschoolers. "You ready for this?" Alexander asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Terrified! Excited! All of it!" Sophie leaned back against him. "Thank you for believing in me, for making this possible." "You made it possible. I just provided the funding. Still, I couldn't have done this without you." Alexander kissed her temple. "We're partners. That's what partners do." Emma ran through the empty classroom, her footsteps echoing. "Mommy, Daddy, look! Big!" "It is big, isn't it?" Sophie called out. "Big enough for lots of friends." The preschool had been Alexander's idea, his wedding gift to Sophie. He'd bought the space, renovated it to her specifications, and hired the best contractors to make her dream a reality. And now, after months of work and planning, it was almost ready. "I want to show you something," Alexander said, leading her to a small plaque by the front door. It read, Little Lily's Learning Center, in memory of Lily Rose Bennett, and in celebration of all the children who will learn and grow here. Sophie traced the letters with her fingers, blinking back tears. It's perfect. She would have loved it here, just like Emma does. They stood there, holding each other, watching their daughter play in the space that would soon be filled with other children's laughter. It was a beginning and an ending all at once, a way to honor the past while embracing the future. The grand opening was a huge success. 20 families enrolled their children, and within 3 months, Sophie had a waiting list. She hired 2 assistant teachers, both of whom adored Emma and treated her like a little sister. The preschool became a beloved fixture in the neighborhood, known for its nurturing environment and innovative curriculum. And every evening, Sophie would come home to the penthouse, where Alexander would be waiting, often with Emma already bathed and in pajamas. They'd have dinner together, the 3 of them, talking about their days. Alexander would tell them about new software developments and difficult clients. Sophie would share funny stories about her students. Emma would interrupt constantly with her own toddler observations about the world. It was ordinary and perfect, and everything Sophie had never dared to dream she could have. One evening, about a year after the wedding, Alexander came home with an unusual expression on his face. Sophie knew him well enough now to recognize when something was weighing on him. "What's wrong?" she asked, after they'd put Emma to bed. "Nothing's wrong." Alexander took her hands, leading her to the couch. "Actually, something's different. I want to talk to you about something." Sophie's heart skipped. "Okay. I've been thinking a lot lately about family, about Emma, about us, about the future." He paused. "How would you feel about adopting?" "Adopting?" Sophie blinked in surprise. "You mean another child?" "Maybe. Or maybe—" He pulled out a folder, handing it to her. "There's a sibling group at the foster care agency. 3 kids, brothers and sisters. They've been in the system for 2 years, and no one wants to take all 3 together." Sophie opened the folder and saw the photos. 3 children, ages 4, 6, and 8, with identical dark eyes and wary expressions. Her heart clenched. "The agency contacted me because of our connection to Dr. Morrison. They know we have space, resources, stability, and Sophie." Alexander's voice grew thick. "They're about to be separated, sent to different homes, and I keep thinking, what if someone had been there for me when I lost my parents? What if someone had been there for you when you were trying to escape Michael? What if we could be that someone for them?" Sophie looked at the photos, then at her husband, then back at the photos. 3 children. That's a lot. "I know, and if it's too much, if you're not ready, I understand, but I thought maybe we could at least meet them." They met the children the following week at the foster care agency. Tyler was 8, protective and serious. Mia was 6, artistic and quiet. And Lucas was 4, energetic and desperate for attention. They were polite but guarded, clearly used to being disappointed by adults. Sophie sat down with them at the play table. "Hi, I'm Sophie, and this is Alexander. That's our daughter Emma over there playing with the blocks." "She's little," Tyler observed, watching Emma. "She is. She's almost 2. Do you guys like blocks?" Slowly, carefully, the children engaged. Mia showed Sophie her drawings. Lucas chased Emma around the play area, both of them giggling. And Tyler, after a long time watching, finally asked Alexander, "Do you play basketball?" "I do. Not very well, but I play." "Could you teach me? To play better, I mean?" Alexander's eyes met Sophie's over Tyler's head. "Yeah, buddy, I could definitely teach you." The adoption process was long and complicated. There were home visits and background checks and endless paperwork. They had to prove they could handle 4 children. They had to show they understood the trauma the siblings had been through. They had to promise to keep the family together no matter what. And through it all, Emma adapted beautifully. She adored her new siblings, following them everywhere, wanting to do everything they did. The penthouse, once so silent and empty, became constantly noisy with children's laughter, arguments, and play. 6 months after that first meeting, the adoption was finalized. Tyler, Mia, and Lucas became Bennett children officially, with Emma as their little sister. They stood in the courthouse, all 7 of them, Sophie, Alexander, Helen, Gerald, Dr. Morrison, and the 4 children, and when the judge declared the adoption complete, they all cried. "Congratulations," the judge said, smiling. "You're officially a family." That night, they had a party at the penthouse. The children ran wild, hopped up on cake and excitement. Helen chased them, laughing. Gerald pretended to be stern but couldn't hide his smile, and Alexander and Sophie stood together, watching their family. Their impossibly beautiful family. "Can you believe this?" Sophie asked. 2 years ago I was alone and terrified. Now look at us." "I believe it, because I lived it too, from empty and broken too." Alexander gestured at the chaos around them. "This." Tyler came running up. Dad, Lucas took my toy!" "I'll handle it," Alexander said, and he walked off to mediate, leaving Sophie smiling at the word Dad spoken so naturally. Mia appeared at Sophie's side, slipping her small hand into Sophie's. "Mom? Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Do you think our first mom would be happy that we're here with you?" Sophie knelt down, looking Mia in the eyes. "I think she'd be so happy. I think she'd be grateful that you're safe and loved and together. That's all any mother wants for her children." "I think so too." Mia hugged her quickly, then ran off to join Emma, who was demanding someone play dolls with her. Dr. Morrison came over, handing Sophie a glass of wine. "You've done an amazing thing here, you know. We just opened our door." "No, you opened your hearts. There's a difference." Sarah looked at Alexander, who was now on the floor with all 4 kids, building what appeared to be a very unstable block tower. "He's happy, really, truly happy. I never thought I'd see it again." "I never thought I'd be happy again either. Funny how that works." "It's not funny, it's brave. You were both brave enough to try again." Later that night, after the children were finally asleep in their rooms, Sophie and Alexander collapsed on their bed, exhausted. "We have 4 children," Sophie said wonderingly. 4? How did that happen?" "We got greedy," Alexander suggested, pulling her close. Sophie laughed. "I'm not complaining, it's just surreal in the best way." "I know what you mean." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "Sophie, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I was thinking about Lily today, about who she would have been, what kind of person she'd be at 5 years old now. And for the first time, it didn't hurt to think about her. I felt grateful. Grateful that I got to love Vanessa, even if it was brief. Grateful that I learned what it means to be a father, even if I never got to meet her. Because it led me here, to you, to our kids." Sophie kissed him softly. "I think Lily and Vanessa would be proud of you, of us, of this family we've built." "I hope so. I really hope so." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, in a house full of children who'd all found their way home through storms of different kinds. 5 years later, on a perfect December evening, the Bennett family gathered in their living room. Emma was 7 now, a confident first grader who kept everyone organized. Tyler was 13, on the basketball team and talking about colleges. Mia was 11, her room full of art supplies and half-finished paintings. And Lucas was 9, constantly in motion, constantly laughing. They were decorating the Christmas tree, a tradition that had become sacred to all of them. Alexander lifted Emma so she could put the star on top, while the older kids strategically placed ornaments where Lucas couldn't knock them down. "Tell us the story, Dad," Mia requested, as she did every year. "Which story?" Alexander asked, though he knew. "The storm story, how you and Mom met." Sophie smiled from her spot on the couch, where she was untangling lights. "You've heard it 100 times. But we like it," Tyler insisted. "It's our family story." So Alexander told it again, the story of a December storm 5 years ago, of a desperate woman with a baby, of an empty penthouse, and a man who'd forgotten how to live. He told them about the fears and the doubts, about Michael and the custody battle, about the slow building of trust and love. "And then what happened?" Lucas asked, even though he knew. "And then we became a family," Sophie finished. "All of us. together. "Best storm ever," Emma declared, hugging her father's leg. "Best storm ever," Alexander agreed, looking at his wife over the heads of their children. Later, after the kids were in bed and the house was quiet again, Sophie found Alexander standing at the window where it had all begun. She wrapped her arms around him from behind. "What are you thinking about?" "About storms, about how sometimes they destroy things, but sometimes they bring exactly what you need." "Deep thoughts from Mr. Bennett. I'm a deep guy." He turned to face her. "Thank you, Sophie, for saying yes, for staying, for building this life with me. Thank you for opening your door, for taking a chance on a stranger and her baby. You were never really strangers. You were always my family. I just had to find you." Outside, it started to rain, gentle December rain that pattered against the windows. But inside, the Bennett family was warm and safe and whole. Emma's teddy bear sat on the mantel next to Lily's memorial plaque. 4 stockings hung ready for Christmas, each with a child's name embroidered carefully by Helen. Photos covered every surface, documenting birthday parties and school plays and ordinary Tuesday dinners. It wasn't the life Alexander had planned. It wasn't the life Sophie had dreamed of. It was better. It was real. It was earned through pain and patience, and the decision to keep choosing love even when it was terrifying. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Sophie asked softly. "That you'd met Vanessa later, or that I'd never married Michael, or that we'd had an easier path?" Alexander was quiet for a long time, considering. "No," he finally said. "Because every piece of our pain made us who we are, made us capable of appreciating this. I loved Vanessa. I'll always love her. But I love you too, and I love our children, and I wouldn't trade this life for anything." "Me neither." Sophie kissed him. "Not for anything in the world." They stood there together, watching the rain, listening to the quiet sounds of their sleeping children, and felt nothing but gratitude. For storms that brought change, for doors that opened when needed, for the courage to begin again. And somewhere in heaven, maybe Lily Rose Bennett and Vanessa Bennett smiled, knowing that the man they'd loved had found his way home.